Did you know that you could play old PC games on your MiYoo Mini? No, I'm not pulling your leg. You totally can. And today I'm going to show you how to do it, but mostly ramble on about the good old PC games that I like to play when I was a young TechDweeb. Roll the intro. Hello there, I'm TechDweeb. How you doing? Can I just say I'm super excited to make this video. More than usual actually, which is crazy because I'm usually really excited. Because I love making videos, and playing with tech toys, and wasting your time with nonsense. Like this. We're here today to talk about two of my favorite things, the MiYoo Mini and good old school PC games from the ancient medieval DOS era. If you're a dinosaur, like me, you probably grew up playing DOS games on your parents' computer and have a brain full of childhood memories of Duke Nukem and Doom and Captain Crunch Cereal and Star Control and Monkey Island and your parents fighting because your dad keeps spending the family grocery money on smokes and Heroes of Might and Magic and Hugo's House of Horrors and Warcraft 2. Or if you're not a decrepit old man and missed this generation of gaming because you weren't even born yet, well, you're in for a treat because the games I'm going to show you today are among the best retro games of all time. Seriously, they're right up there with Mario and Donkey Kong. These are absolute classics, and most of them hold up today. They're a ton of fun, and almost no one is talking about them. All the reviews of the MiYoo Mini and Onion OS are like, oh, and you can also run DOS games. And then they don't even show Heroes of Might and Magic 2 for crying out loud. Well, that's my job, I suppose. I've made a bunch of videos on the MiYoo Mini. Check them out on my channel if you want after this video. This is my current favorite mini retro handheld. I also love my new Retroid Pocket 3. That thing is awesome. But the MiYoo Mini almost serves an entirely different purpose. It lives in my pocket. It's so small that I just bring it everywhere by default. And I'm always finding times throughout the day when I have a few minutes to spare and I can pull it out and squeeze in a quick little gaming session while I wait for my turn in the checkout line at the grocery store to spend my YouTube money on a cart full of Oreos. I made a recent video where I installed the latest version of Onion OS on the MiYoo Mini. This is Onion OS v4. I'll link to that video in the description below, so watch that video before this one, or after this one I guess would be good, because it's basically required for what we're going to be doing today. And there are a few videos around online about this stuff, but lots of the guides are outdated now that there's a new version of Onion OS version 4. I'm going to show you how to do 3 things specifically with this newest version of Onion. I'm going to show you the ports, which are native Onion emulators that run individual games like Doom. I'm going to show you DOS games that you download yourself and can play using the DOS box emulation that's built into Onion. And I'm going to show you SCUMM games. You know, those point-and-click adventure games. Those games have their own emulator, and they're a little bit tricky to get working, but it's easy once you know what you're doing. And I'm going to show you how. Let's start with the ports, actually, because they're the easiest. The ports, for the most part, are DOS games, but this is different from running native DOS games that I'll show you later. These ports are old games that have been adapted to this device using new game engines. So Onion has some pre-installed ports. The first step is that you'll need to enable the ports menu if you haven't already, under the package manager. So just go into the apps menu and select package manager. Once you're in the package manager, scroll down to find ports and press A to make sure it's toggled to on, and then press start. After that, you should have the ports option added to your games menu. In the ports section, you'll see a bunch of games there. None of these will work right away. See, if you try to start one, you'll get an error, so you'll need to copy over the files for them before they'll work. Except for Cave Story. That's included by default. Now, each of these games has a different requirement for setting up. Luckily, the Onion GitHub has a good description of what files you'll need for each of the games and where to put them. There's a link in the description below. How will you actually get the games? Well, you could buy them, I guess. Like if you own them on Steam or GOG, like I do, you could use the files you get from those. But if there's a game you don't own, I guess you could be a sneaky pirate and find it yourself. What's that? You don't know where to go? Oh, like figure it out, dude. It's not hard. Watch. Wolfenstein Full DOS game. Oh look, I searched for it and I found somewhere I could download it. And now I have it. It took me 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure you can figure this stuff out. I believe in you, buddy. So the Onion OS GitHub says that for the Wolfenstein port, it needs a special BIOS file, and there's a link to download it. I'll include a link to this file in my description too. So let's click that link and download the file. And it says we need to put it into the BIOS folder on our MiYoo Mini. Okay, easy enough. And then it says we need to copy all of our WL6 files from our Wolfenstein game over to the MiYoo Mini. Oh, I guess I should mention that these are kept in the ROMs folder, and then the ports folder, and then the binaries folder. And there's a separate folder for each game there. So let's open up Wolfenstein, and then there's another folder there called Files Here. And this is where we need to put those files. So we'll copy them over and, well, that's it. It should work now. So let's test it out. Oh, hey, look at that. We got some Wolfenstein happening. And this is basically the same process for all the games. Wolfenstein's the only one that needed a BIOS. For the rest, you should be fine just to copy over the files from the game you downloaded and drop it into the corresponding Files Here folders in your MiYoo Mini ports directory. You can drop in your Quake files, your Duke Nukem 3D file, your Doom 1 and Doom 2 WAD files, Spear of Destiny, which is the sequel to Wolfenstein, and of course, the most important game in this entire video, Super 3D Noah's Ark. So this game is like a non-violent Wolfenstein 3D. Instead of murdering Nazis with guns, you feed goats to put them to sleep. Other than that, it's basically the same game, it looks like. And hey, at least some nice Christian kids in the 90s got to play a first-person shooter game. The ports all run amazing, by the way. I mean, most of these little retro handhelds could play Quake and Doom and Wolfenstein, but like all games, they're really an awesome experience on the MiYoo Mini. With its beautiful, bright IPS screen. And of course, we have Doom. This game has been ported to every single device, like, ever. This game brings back memories, man. This game was a juggernaut. Everyone loved Doom when I was a kid. When we finally got a computer that could run this game, it could barely play it. You had to shrink the screen down super tiny to get even close to playable FPS. But I did it anyways, because I could actually play Doom on my own computer, and that was amazing to me. But here's the thing. At the time, we had a 40 megabyte hard drive. 40 megabytes. Doom was like 3 or 4 megabytes, and we had a few megabytes worth of documents or taxes or whatever my parents used the computer for. So to get enough free space to play Doom, I had to uninstall Windows, install Doom, play Doom, and then when I was done, I had to save my game, copy my save game to a floppy, uninstall Doom, and then reinstall Windows. That's what I had to go through for this game, and it was worth it. So as far as ports, I played a bunch of Quake, Wolfenstein 3D, Spear of Destiny, and of course Doom 1 and Doom 2. Pretty much all these games work really good on the MiYoo Mini. Wolfenstein at one point gave me a little bit of audio stuttering, and when I was troubleshooting it, I changed the resolution. Then the colors went all weird, and nothing I did would set them right, so I just deleted the autosave and the config and loaded it up again, and it worked great after that. Spear of Destiny is the sequel to Wolfenstein 3D, and it's barely any different. It's more just like an extra couple levels. Super Noah's 3D Ark is yeah, it works. If you want to play this, you totally can. Both Doom 1 and Doom 2 play flawlessly. They work well with the controls. They even use the MiYoo Mini's rumble motor. Why can't I say that? Rumble motor, whatever you shoot. They're buttery smooth too, these ports. Unlike the native DOS versions, these ones run perfect. I tried to get Hexen to work. That's one of my favorite games that use the Doom engine. I tried cloning the Doom port and swapping out the files and adjusting the config file, but I couldn't get it to work. It just crashed RetroArch. But that game is on the PS1 and it runs fine there, so I'm not too sad about that. Quake is a treat. It runs great, looks great. I know it looks really dark in the video, but that's just the camera being dumb. It looks amazing on this crisp little screen. And it's actually super playable. I could totally play through the whole game like this and have a good time. And of course, my favorite port and my favorite game from this era, Duke Nukem 3D. You have no idea how much I played this game. I was obsessed with this game. I'm not going to go into the big long story of my history with this game, but the short version is that I love it more than pretty much anything, including my cat. Meow! These are all the ports I tried, but there's others, and there are actually a few more that you can download, like Blood, Shadow Warrior, and Redneck Rampage. However, they're all for the older version of Onion, and they're not directly compatible with this new version, but I have a feeling I can get them to work pretty easily. If I decide to do that, I'll make a quick video about them and give you the link to download the updated ports. Oh wait, I lied. I also tried Cannonball, which is the port of Outrun, and it's really good. You should play it. Alright, now we're going to talk about DOS games. So those ports that I showed you, like Quake and Doom and Duke 3D, those are DOS games. But the ports are each specifically made to run the files optimally with modern features and compatibility. However, you aren't just limited to the 10 or whatever ports that come installed with Onion. You can actually add whatever DOS games you want, because Onion comes pre-installed with the DOS box RetroArch core. And it's actually super easy to add DOS games. All you gotta do is download the games. However you want to get them is up to you, either GOG or just search them up on Google and find them in the dark corners of the internet. And then you can either extract them from the archive that you download, or you can just copy the zip file over to the DOS ROMs directory on your MiYoo Mini. Just make sure that in your games menu that you refresh your ROM list by pressing the select button. After that, your games should appear in the games list. Real quick, I'll walk you through getting a game running. Now, this is terminal velocity. When you start up a game, you should get a menu that lists all the executable files for that game. It's usually just a matter of starting up the game by selecting the main executable file. If you don't know which one's the main one, just try whichever one you think is the one, and if it doesn't work, just try a different one. So here in terminal velocity, tv.exe is the right answer. Once you get into the game, you're going to find that the controls might not work in the default config. They probably won't work. This is usually the case. I'll show you how to bind those in a second. Keep in mind that these games were played on a computer keyboard, so sometimes you'll need to type something or press some weird button on the keyboard. If the game is like, press the I button to open your inventory and it's not bound, you'll need to press that manually by pressing the MiYoo button, and that brings up the little keyboard. However, since that button is usually bound to the game switcher, what I needed to do was disable that function in the tweaks menu so that I could easily bring up that keyboard, because every time I would press it otherwise, it would bring up the game switcher. So I just turned that off. As for the movement controls and stuff, well, it's a little bit hit or miss. Most of the games have controls already bound, but even then, they're usually bound for a full controller with analog sticks, so even there you'll probably have to rebind the direction buttons at least, and some games don't have any bindings at all, so you'll need to bind everything. It's not hard, just open up the RetroArch menu by pressing the function and select, go down to Controls, Port 1 Controls, and then you can bind whatever button you want to any keyboard command, or mouse movement. For mouse-based games like strategy games or whatever, you'll need to bind the D-pad as the mouse's axes. It's a little bit tedious, but it's not hard to figure out. Once you get the controls the way you like them, make sure to save the remapped file for that game under the controls menu, just in case you ever have to put those controls in again if they get reset for whatever reason. And if you're not familiar with RetroArch, you'll probably need to go down to the Save Game Overrides in the Overrides section to make sure that these controls are applied every time you launch this game. I made a guide for how to use RetroArch if all this is confusing. You should probably watch that if you find this a little overwhelming. There's a link to that in the description below. Oh, and I'll mention it now, why not? If you save your state for the game in a DOS box, you'll actually need to start up the game before you can load that state. You can't load it from the main menu or the game switcher or anything. I played a bunch of games that I loved when I was younger. Terminal Velocity was a great game. I played that one a lot. It ran okay here. It was a little bit choppy, but honestly, this is about how it ran on my old PC at the time, so it felt pretty authentic. There's this other game, Quarantine. It's sort of like a cyberpunk driving game where you can run over pedestrians and see their blood splatter all over the windows. Young TechDweeb just loved that. This one ran okay too. You can tweak the emulated processor speed and RAM and stuff if the performance isn't great, but I found that it always made it worse. So I'm pretty sure the performance you see is the performance you'll get. These games don't run as well as the ports, but they do run, and they're largely playable as long as you're not running anything too demanding. The 2D games will run perfectly. This one is Traffic Department 2192. I remember playing through this entire game. And of course, no DOS emulation test would be complete without Heroes of Might and Magic 2. I had to set the mouse controls myself. Basically, I had to do the controls for every single game I tested, but it takes less than a minute. Honestly, once you get the hang of it, you'll be a pro. I really wish you could see how good this looks on this screen in real life. The camera doesn't do it justice at all. It's perfectly crisp. It's actually beautiful looking. The screen on the MiYoo Mini is 640 by 480, which is pixel perfect monitor resolution for these old games. I have a bunch of DOS games that I played a bit of just to make sure they work. I'm looking forward to playing more of them on the MiYoo Mini because it's actually a really nice experience playing them here. And of course, I wanted to end with some Warcraft 2. This is hands down my favorite strategy game of all time. I freaking loved this game. I played a ton of Warcraft 2 back in the day with my dweeb friend over our modems, not the internet. I'm talking about directly over our phone line based 28.8 BPS modems. As long as Mom didn't need to use the phone, of course. Ah, those were the days. Let's move on to our final section today, which is SCUMM. For those that don't know, including me. I had to look it up. SCUMM stands for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion, which I suppose that it means it's sort of a framework that was developed to emulate Maniac Mansion, but then it was adapted to include other point-and-click adventure games. The installation for SCUMM games is, well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not super straightforward. However, I will make it easy for you. Just follow along with what I do, and I can all but guarantee that your games will work fine. You can get your games however you want, Steam or GOG, or download them like a pirate. However, there's one game that's totally free, and you should download that because it's really good. It's called Beneath a Steel Sky. There's a link to this in the description below. Alright, here's how you do it. So once you have your game archive, you can't just copy over the zip file like we can in DOSBox. There's a few extra steps. The first step is we'll need to create a folder for our game in our ScummVM ROMs directory. We'll call this one Beneath a Steel Sky. After that, we need to dump all the files from the game archive into this folder. Well, actually, technically, you only need to copy a few specific files. And if you want to know which files you need to copy, you can check out the ScummVM wiki for that game. For example, here in Beneath a Steel Sky, you can see that we need these two specific files that it shows on the wiki page. But honestly, you can just dump everything from the entire archive into the folder if you're lazy like me. And also then you'll be keeping all the files for the game together if you ever need the rest of the files for running it on the PC or whatever. But we're not done yet. There's another step, which is that we need to make a new text document in the root level of the ScummVM ROMs folder. And it needs to be called the exact name as our folder, Beneath a Steel Sky, and instead of .txt, we need to call it .scummvm. And then, believe it or not, we're still not done, because this file needs something inside of it. So try to open that file, and when it asks what program to use, say Notepad. If you say to do this for all files with this extension, it'll remember it forever. Now, what do we need to put in here? The ScummVM ID for that game. How do we know the ScummVM ID for the game? Well, you gotta look it up. There's a website with a list of all the ScummVM IDs. I'll include links to all this stuff in the description below, by the way. The ScummVM ID for Beneath a Steel Sky is Sky. So we'll put that into the file we made, save the file, and then at long last we're done. If you have done this correctly, the game should work just fine. If you're following along and haven't clicked away from the video, congratulations! You've just added your first ScummVM game.
Yay!
Honestly, it seems complicated, but as soon as you do it one time, you'll realize that it's actually pretty simple. I did it for a whole whack of games all at once, and they only took like a minute each. The games run just great. There are a lot of great ScummVM games, and the MiYoo Mini is actually an awesome device to play them on because of that bright, beautiful screen, and the emulator works well in adapting the mouse-based pointed-click controls into a D-pad. And also, they're just good games that you can play for a few minutes at a time or dive into a long session and play for hours. The audio is nice and clear. I just love that MIDI audio in some of these games. Oh, speaking of the audio, there's a quirk with that. For games ripped from a CD, just make sure that the CD audio track MP3s or whatever they are in the same directory as the rest of the game files. But you often have a choice. Some games come with either a CD version or a disc version. And I generally prefer the disc version of the games instead of the CD versions. The disc versions are just a couple megs each, but the CD versions are often a few hundred megabytes. And that'll add up quickly on your SD card. And with the disc version, you just avoid the whole problem with the audio files. Even if the audio isn't quite CD quality or whatever. I actually like the MIDI audio, because that's the sort of audio I had when I played these games back in the day. Only the rich kids had CD-ROMs in their computer. Oh, and if you're wondering how I got the screenshots and the box art for my games, I used a tool called Screen Scraper. Of course, I made a tutorial of how to use Screen Scraper, how to use it to get the art for your games, for your devices. I'll include a link to that video and the Screen Scraper download in the description below. If you had told young TechDweeb that someday he would have a tiny little Game Boy that contained all his favorite DOS games and could play them on a beautiful, sharp color display, I'd have called you a liar and kicked you in the groin and run home crying. I was a troubled kid. The games that came out on PC during the NES and SNES era are largely ignored when discussing retro games and retro game devices. Everyone loves to go on and on about Super Mario World or Final Fantasy, and don't get me wrong, I freaking love those games, but for me, the games that defined my childhood are games like Warcraft 2, Doom, Heroes of Might and Magic, Day of the Tentacle, Terminal Velocity, Duke Nukem 3D, Sam & Max, Traffic Department, and of course, Putt Putt Goes to the Moon. And playing them here on the MiYoo Mini, I'm reminded how great they are. These games weren't just good for the time, they're still good today. Just like Mario Brothers and Sonic, these good old games are a piece of history. And you can pick up a MiYoo Mini, or any of these cheap retro handhelds really, as long as they support DOSBox, or even your phone for crying out loud. Seriously, does this blow your mind? It's kind of blowing my mind. The toys we have today. This is absolutely amazing. We should all be amazed and delighted. But everyone's always just complaining about these things. You get reviewers on YouTube who are all like, the shoulder buttons are too clicky, and it can't play Bloody Roar 2, so this device is a piece of garbage. And I'm over here like, oh my god, this thing can play all my old favorite PC games? Here's a Might and Magic 2 in my pocket? Are you kidding me? That's why I'm not great at reviewing these things. Because I like everything. And that brings us to the end. I hope you found this useful, and I hope that right after this video, you're going to be firing up a bunch of good old DOS games and ports and SCUMM games on your MiYoo Mini. Please let me know in the comments below. Are you old enough to have played DOS games when you were a kid? If not, have you checked any out? Do you have any favorites? Give your favorite old PC games a shout out in the comments below, and we can get all nerdy down there. And while you're down there, click the thumbs up button if you liked the video, or the thumbs down button if you didn't. Subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. As always, I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.